Well, good morning. This is Dr. Calatrello, and if you're viewing this, that's good because it means you've come looking for maybe some advice or some insight into our first writing assignment, which is called a reflective essay. It is called a reflective essay because, for lack of a better term, that's precisely what I'm asking you to do, is to reflect on something that we have read in this first unit, the fiction unit. And since this is a unit that is comprised primarily of stories, what I'm asking you to do is to reflect on a particular story of your choice. So I am not going to be assigning a particular story for you to write about. This is up to you. So let's begin by looking at the paper guidelines together. And let me give you some background on it. I'm a fan of a particular writer by the name of Norman Maclean, who is most famous for his novella A River Runs Through It, which was later turned into a movie that was directed by Robert Redford and starred a very young Brad Pitt. So if you're looking for some Brad Pitt entertainment and a darn good story and a darn good movie, I highly recommend A River Runs Through It. And so I did my dissertation on Norman Maclean when I was doing my PhD, and so I did a lot of reading about Norman Maclean, his own personal writings, his articles, and of course everything that was written about Norman Maclean. Anyways, as I was doing so, I came across this quote from him, and it really stuck with me. So this idea, this concept of Maclean's really serves as the really conceptual underpinning of this assignment and what I'm asking you to do. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to read through this prompt, and then maybe we can unpack some particular aspects of it as we see fit. And of course, if you still have questions about the assignment, please know that you can always contact me. I'm always glad to meet with students or talk with them about what they're thinking about writing. Okay, so here we go. The writer, Norman Maclean, wrote, quote, "The nearest anyone can come to finding himself at any given age is to find a story that somehow tells him about himself." Maclean's observation resonates more and more deeply within me as I continue to teach and study literature. In other words, good literature really is about us, not about the characters. In fact, I would submit that any really good piece of art, whether it's a story, whether it's a movie, whether it's a painting or a sculpture, is good because somehow we connect with it in some meaningful or compelling way. Put another way, it tells us something about ourselves or the people that we have known. And I really do believe this. I really think there's something to the stories that, number one, to narratives and to stories in the macro sense. I think that's absolutely an essential element of the human condition. It's what we do, right? We tell stories, we write stories, we read stories, and they are sometimes short little conversations we have with our loved ones or our friends when they ask, "Hey, how's your day?" And you say, "God, you wouldn't believe what happened to me today." And off you go telling your story. But in this specific application, we're talking about a story, one of the stories in our unit, one that we've read, one that when you read it, you need to be somehow moved by it, to varying degrees. But there's something about a story, and there are a bunch of them in that learning unit, as you know. But what we're really getting after here is trying to find a story that somehow you connected with. Maybe there was a particular conflict in the story, or maybe a dynamic that was at play in between the characters. Or maybe there was a particular theme that you that appealed to you because it somehow rang true to your own experience in your life. So here's the assignment then. Choose one piece of fiction that we have read in this learning unit and explain how it connects or tells you about yourself or those that you have known. Guidelines. The guidelines for the essay are as follows. Your essay must be between 2 and 3 pages of written text. This means at least 2 full pages of text, okay, in a properly MLA formatted document, which means a 12-point Times New Roman font, double-spaced, using your MLA format, 1-inch margins, top, bottom, left, and right, everything that maybe you already have some experience with coming out of English 101, perhaps recently, or perhaps even going back to your high school days. Now, what I want you to do as well, as you are telling your story, because that's really what you're doing, you're going to be sort of modulating between the story that you're telling, a particular thing that happened to you, an incident. That's what when we're writing narratives, we have to make sure that they're focused. So we're telling a story, and then what we're doing is moving and illustrating to your reader how what's happened in your story somehow connects to, again, some aspect of the story that we have, that you've chosen, okay? As you do so, as you move through the essay, you're going to be required to engage the text. Now, what that means is that you are taking the reader and transitioning from your story to something that has occurred in the story that you've chosen, okay? And you need to do that at least 3 times, okay, to support your discussion. This means that you're quoting relevant passage from the text that supports the point that you are making in your story. Make certain that you're integrating those passages smoothly into your own prose and documenting them using the MLA format. And I would highly encourage you, if you haven't already done so, I have provided for you all a sample student essay in our learning unit. I want you to read through that, okay? I think that's probably more instructive and maybe more useful at the end of the day than listening to me talk about the assignment. Because you'll be able to see how, in a sample essay of this nature, how the writer has skillfully moved from the story that's being told to the text of the short story that they are using for their assignment. Okay. You're going to need to include a works cited page, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in just a few moments. I'm going to show you a couple of things. I want to make sure that you do this works cited page correctly. It's very simple. Finally, you need to submit your essay via Blackboard on or before the due date. And remember, too, that this needs to be submitted as a Microsoft Word file, okay? And if you look in our video tutorial section of the class, you will see a video that I've done that documents and presents to you exactly how I want those essays formatted, okay? A couple of final remarks about the assignment sheet piece here. You need to remember that I'm just going to be very candid with you how I operate. I'm reading a lot of these essays, hundreds of them, okay? And the very first thing that I do is I scan the essay to make sure that the paper has met the minimum guidelines. And those that do not meet the guidelines, I do not even read them. I put a 50/F on your paper, okay? So in other words, I look through your paper and I see that you don't have a title. I see that you don't have a works cited page. Whatever the case is, it's you single-space the document, or you have not used the text of the story 3 times as you've been asked to do. I don't read the paper. I just put a 50F on it and send it right back to you. Okay. So you need to make sure that you're always doing. You got to make sure this paper, any paper you write, any assignment that you have in college, you got to make sure that you are doing what has been asked of you, that you understand the assignment, and that you in fact are executing it. Just right out of the gate. I score the essay by and large using the grading policy, a rubric that you have available to you in our Blackboard course. That said, I also will, I read every paper very closely, and you will, when you get your essay back from me, certainly this reflective essay, you will see a lot of marks on it, okay? You're going to see lots of cryptic little writing through it where I'm really responding to the essay as a reader. And you will see some codes that are written in the margins. And anytime you see something you don't really understand, like if you see a G6 in the margins, that means that you've got a comma splice, and the codes that I use when I'm grading a paper correspond to our handbook, A Writer's Reference, by Diana Hacker, that many of you may already have from English 101. Okay, I think that's probably enough here. One thing I will say, you would do well if you look again at that sample essay, because what I'm really looking for is I'm really looking for you to use McLean's quote really as a jumping off point in the paper. So I'll be looking for some reference to Norman McLean and his story, not a story, but his quote, in your essay, and you can utilize that quote as part of your thesis. Okay, and if you look at the sample essay, you may see how another student has done so. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide here in just a moment here. Okay, let's talk a little bit about producing the works cited page. So let's say that you've got the text of your paper written, and you thought, oh geez, I got to do that works cited page. So let's look at our textbook. Our textbook is what's called an anthology. Okay, an anthology is a kind of book that is made up of multiple works. In other words, in our case, we have lots of short stories in there. We've got plays, we've got poems, all written by different authors. So anthologies, by their nature then, are usually assembled and put together by editors. And that's our case. We have Michael Meyer and D. Quentin Miller. Michael Meyer is really the main editor of this textbook. So let's say that you have chosen to write on one of the stories that's contained in this textbook, and you're wondering, how do I prepare the works cited page for it? So it's very simple. Okay, so let me direct you to our handbook. I'm currently using the 9th edition of A Writer's Reference, and I turn to page 409 because I've looked it up in the index at the beginning of the MLA section, right here, where we have directories to various MLA models. Okay. So when you're preparing a works cited page, the first thing you must do is figure out what kind of source it is that you're working with, that you're attempting to craft an entry for. So I've already told you we're using an anthology. So if we look it up in our if we look it up in our directory, we see it here on page 409, because it says we want one. Let me zoom in a little bit here. What we're looking at, let me focus that thing for us. Okay, so I'm on the bottom of page 409, and we're going to choose this option right here. We're not going to cite the entire anthology. That would be incorrect. Really what we're after is item number 32, one selection from an anthology or a collection. So it's really straightforward. Let's say, for example, that you're, I just opened this. Let's say you're writing on Sonny's Blues by James Baldwin, right? So what we would do is we would do the author of the selection would be Baldwin, comma, James, period. Then in quotation marks, we'd put the title of the selection. And again, in our case, it's going to be Sonny's Blues. That's the title of the story. Then a period, and then we're going to italicize the title of the anthology. Well, the title of our anthology is the title of our textbook, Literature to Go. And then a comma, and then edited by, and I think it's enough if we simply use Michael Meyer. Okay, let's just agree upon that. Edited by Michael Meyer, and then we'll go to our publisher. Our publisher is Bedford St. Martin's, comma, followed by the year of publication. We could open this up and we can see, looky here, the most recent one is 2020. And then our inclusive pages. What are our inclusive pages? Well, it starts on page 76, and we just go to where the story ends. And in our case, for this spans pages 76 to 99. Okay, so we would put 76, 99 period. Now note as well, the entry is double-spaced. Note that the second line, if your entry requires it, is indented. Typically a half an inch, or on my computer I just simply hit the tab button and it indents appropriately for me. While we're talking about works cited list, just as a reminder, it's not going to apply really, I don't think, for anything that we're doing in this class. But if you're creating a works cited page and you are citing multiple works, like you have 5 or 6, maybe you're doing an extensive research paper, you've got to remember that all works cited pages are, in fact, bibliographies, and so as such, all bibliographies must be alphabetized by author last name. Just a quick friendly reminder about that. Okay, I've got one more little thing I want to talk to you about with respect to the works cited page, and that has to do with citing a PDF that has been provided to you by me in this learning unit. So we will, let me shift gears here, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Okay, so let's talk about a situation that might apply to you. Let's say that you have decided that you want to write on a story that really wasn't in our textbook, but it was maybe one of the stories that I provided to you all in the fiction learning unit. I think there's like Catherine Mansfield's Miss Brill, maybe I think, what's the other one in there? Oh, Alice Walker, maybe her story, Everyday Use. I can't really think of the others off the top of my head at the moment. But let's say you're writing on that, and you need to prepare a works cited entry. So a PDF in a course like Blackboard, I would consider as a type of source. I would categorize that as what we would call course materials. Okay. Now the MLA did a very fine job of addressing how to use or how to cite course materials in the 8th edition of A Writer's Reference under a previous version of the MLA. just as a sidebar, the Modern Language Association, or the MLA, really does change, in my opinion, a little more often than is probably necessary. And so when they changed most recently, they really forgot to address how to do course materials satisfactorily. If you look in our current edition of a writer's reference, you really won't see in that MLA directory of bibliographic entries really an appropriate model to use for a PDF that's provided to you by your instructor. And so what I've done, and I addressed this in that FAQ section of our course under course menus, but I thought I would do it here as well, thinking that you may be more apt to watch a video than dig through frequently asked questions in a Blackboard course. So here's the scenario. You need to document and quote the story Miss Brill from Catherine Mansfield. So what I'm providing to you here is really, I think, the most logical way to craft a bibliographic entry for a PDF that's provided to you by me, at least in this semester. So we're going to begin by the author's last name, Mansfield, comma, Catherine, period. We're going to put the title of the short story in quotation marks, Miss Brill, period. ND stands for no date, because I don't believe there's a date associated with that story. And then the format, PDF file, period, course materials, period, EN 102, comma, then our term, spring 2021, period. So if this applies to you, please do follow this format, particularly with respect to the capitalization and the formatting. In other words, make sure you're putting commas as you should and periods where they are. You want it to look exactly like this if you're using the Catherine Mansfield. The only thing that would change, of course, if you're using Alice Walker is the particulars of Alice Walker. Okay, so again, if you have, in the upper right-hand corner, of course, you've got always your last name and the page number. That's MLA format that you want to make sure that you remember to. Well, two things about that. Let me say, number one, make sure that you always have last name and page number in every one of your papers in an MLA formatted paper, and then also, it's always good to make sure that your works cited page is actually part of your paper. Don't create an extra file and then for your works cited page. That just complicates things. Just tab down until you get to a new page in your word processor and bang out the works cited page. One other thing too I've noticed, even though you see only one work listed here on the works cited page, I still want you to write works cited on the top. It's just because that's what this is. It's a list of works that you have cited. It just so happens, though, you only have one. So don't be tempted to write work cited, okay? Because it's just a stylistic and formatting a choice that you want to make sure you're consistent with from paper to paper. I can't think of anything else off of the top of my head about what to do here with the works cited page. So I'm gonna pause this and maybe come up with a few closing remarks. Okay, so I thought maybe running through a couple of these, not all of them, but a couple of these that I think are worth reiterating. This document, of course, is available to you in Blackboard, but these are some tips that I've put together for students who are setting out to write about literature. Number one, and this is a pitfall. I see students struggle with this an awful lot here in this first essay. We must remember that when we're writing about events that are taking place in the story, we always use the present tense. And the idea behind that choice of verb tenses is that the action in a piece of fiction is always occurring each time we read the story. Okay, so let me say that again and let that sink in. The action that's happening in a story is always taking place in the present tense, every time that we read about it or we read the story. So when we write about the story, we need to make sure that our verbs are in the present tense for action that's taking place in the story. Here's an example. When Phoenix Jackson encounters the hunter, readers, blah, blah, blah. So our verb in that sentence is encounters, and this is correct. See, it's in the present tense. Now, sometimes what students will do is they'll write something like, when Phoenix Jackson encountered the hunter, as if the action had taken place and ended in the past tense. So remember, as you proofread and edit your paper, this is one of the things you're going to want to do. Check those verb tenses when you are referring to what's happening in the story, the short story that you're writing about. Number 2 seems self-evident, but you'd be surprised. Always identify the author by full name on the first reference to the title, and then afterwards refer to the author by his or her last name. Example, in Eudora Welty's A Worn Path, Welty, ... whatever. So full name on first reference, and then last name on all subsequent references to the author. Never, ever, 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 ever refer to the author by his or her first name. Okay? Always write in the third person now, but hold up. Wait a minute. Unless the assignment specifically asks you to draw upon your personal experiences. Avoid using the first pronoun I and the second person pronoun you in academic writing. Use the third person. Now, but we're writing a reflective paper for this first essay. So this is the only time that it's acceptable and really required for you to use the first person pronoun in anything you write for this class. Okay. You're going to want a thesis in the introduction, right? If we're writing this reflective paper, maybe we're writing on Thomas Wolfe's great little piece called Powder, which I'm coming to somewhat recently. I had never read it before this edition came out, but it's a great story. That's the story that you're writing about. So you're going to want a thesis in there. So you're going to maybe have a statement in there that identifies the piece that you are writing about by author and title of the story, and then assert something about it that's going to tie back to that Norman Maclean quote, right? Something like, Thomas Wolfe's Powder reminded me of a similar incident I had with my father, period, right? And then off you go. Let's see. Avoid self-conscious writing. That's a good tip. It really doesn't apply to this essay, I don't think, quite as much, but I'll just go ahead and talk about this because you need to know it. Avoid what I call self-conscious writing. In other words, self-conscious writing is writing when you're writing something that draws attention to the fact that you're writing something. Right? Never announce what you are going to do. As Nike says, just do it. So here's an example of something you would want to avoid. You don't want to write something like, ever, in this essay, I will attempt to show you how, blah, blah, blah. Don't do that. I will write in the margins, just do it. Nike's slogan. Okay. I think that's probably enough off of this page. I may slide down to the next page of this document here in a minute and see if there's anything else that's relevant. But just some other things to think about as you approach the assignment. Obviously, make sure you craft a meaningful title for your essay. Okay? Do not title your essay reflective essay. I will vomit in my mouth if you do that. And because here's the deal: when you're introducing an essay, it's sort of a seduction in a way. You're trying to tease the reader into reading beyond it. And sometimes I have written as much on student essays when they write something like reflective essay. I will write right next to it something like, you always want to, let me put it this way, you always want to craft a title for your essay that has a quality about it that will make your reader want to read past it. Okay, so let that sink in. Hit the rewind button and listen to that statement again. Okay. Let's think about, let me just mention this as well, this next point to you, because I think it will help some of you if you at least have this thought in your mind as you're drafting this paper. Listen, I know these short stories inside and out, backwards and front. I've read these stories for many, many years, with the exception of maybe just a couple that are in this new edition. But I know what happens in these stories. I know who the characters are. I know the conflicts. I know the themes. I know the symbols. So you don't need to spend any time at all explaining to me about what happens in these stories. I know that. So really the burden for you, or not the burden, that's too strong a word, but maybe not, but the obligation that you have in this essay is to make sure that you are telling your story in such a way that it is vivid, it's memorable. You're telling it in such a way that I, as an outsider who doesn't know you, doesn't know the story that you are writing about from your own biography, your own life, I don't know the story. So you need to keep that in mind, okay? Let me see if I can cast it another way. Sometimes when I'm reading this batch of essays, I find myself scratching my head a little bit because maybe the writer has asserted that this story is meaningful because it reminds them of some special event or a person or a situation in their life, and then they don't really spend much time explaining it. They use very general terms. They don't give any examples, no specific anecdotes, no direct quotations, maybe from a situation that you had lived through or experienced with somebody. And that's exactly what you need to be doing. Because when you do that, when you tell your story in a very specific and concrete and well thought out, memorable way, then I know the short stories, then I'll be able to say, oh yeah, this is just like what happens in A Worn Path, or yeah, this is I can see why this student connected with this story based on what he or she has has written about here. Okay, so keep that in mind. Let me see if I can slide. Oh, look at that, I can. Life is good. I can scroll through here. Yeah, I here, number 9, I think I just maybe mentioned about that. But anytime you're writing about literature, when we get to the poetry section, I'm thinking of as well, and to a lesser extent the drama section, because the drama assignment's going to be a little different this semester. But anyway, you can always, when you're writing about literature, you can always assume that the reader is familiar with the text, okay? So what that means is that you don't have to do a plot summary or explain who a character is or what happens in the story, right? Let me end with number 10. Always craft a thoughtful introduction and conclusion to your papers. Again, right with that title of your essay. The introduction, then, is the next really critical piece in the essay, because you're really trying to draw that reader in and create interest, right? See, I wish we were in class sometimes. Well, all the time I do, really. But you've got to remember this. And I always tell my 101 students this, but certainly my 102 students as well. Well, and really in any academic situation or setting that you're writing in, you have a certain luxury as a student. In other words, let me put it this way. You are guaranteed by the very nature of our relationship as student and instructor, you are 100% guaranteed that I'm going to read your paper, right? Because I have to, right? It's my job. But that's sort of an artificial arrangement in a sense, because when you get out of school and you're writing correspondence for your businesses, for your employer, on the job, when you're writing these meaningful correspondences, and maybe you're outlining in an email to your manager or supervisor why you deserve a raise. Right, you need to be you need to be writing in such a way that your reader is going to really want to read what you've written. So give those introductions some thought, and similarly the conclusions as well. Never leave a writer hanging at the end of a body paragraph, right? And certainly at the conclusion, one thing you don't want to do is write in conclusion. That's sort of self-evident and redundant. The reader can see it's the last paragraph on the printed page, and so the reader knows and should certainly know that your discussion is drawing down. So it's redundant to write in conclusion. It's sort of like wearing suspenders and a belt, right? It's redundant. You don't need to do both. Choose one. Rock the suspenders or just wear the silly belt. Okay. Well, this should be enough for us now, and I'm getting giddy now, so I better go. I hope you guys are well and staying well and healthy. Let me know if you need anything, if you have any questions. Let them rip. Bye.